Hello and welcome back to the Company Road podcast. So since episode 9, I've actually been reflecting on the impact that design and our work can have on communities and societies and the planet more broadly. So I was really delighted to go deeper into the world of civic design with today's guest, Andrew Broughton. He's the Senior Manager of Design and Innovation at WorkSafe Victoria. And this is where he leads the organisation's innovation efforts by overseeing the design practice. He has a diverse portfolio ranging from solving problems, complex problems that is, to optimizing processes. Andrew and his team excel at finding effective solutions. So he began his career as a designer in Melbourne, and he started in brand and advertising, and he later transitioned into more tech transformation and then digital performance. And before joining WorkSafe, he worked as a design consultant with a portfolio of international clients. And he's created impacts for many, many people and many clients, and for projects from a social innovation side of things in Footscray to strategic design for banks and Garner. So he's really experienced. His current mission is to leverage design from a civic perspective, empowering and enriching our community in every possible way. So let's jump in and hear what we had to say. Thank you. Hello, and Andrew, welcome to the show. I wanted to start with, a huge thank you for coming onto the show, but also a bit of a reflection and one that connects my world with yours currently. And it takes me a few years back, but I'll always fondly remember my experience with WorkSafe, where I was actually working as a consultant with Accenture at the time and as a UX designer on a transformation project. And we were looking at various design problems that, if solved, would actually help most Victorian businesses, which was a really cool thing to do. It was going to help with OH&S, work safety, obviously, business, team capability, morale. It was going to do a lot of things for good. And I remember the feeling of responsibility and weight on my shoulders as I was, moving things around the page and pushing things through research, that this is actually making a difference here. So when so many digital design projects, primarily for commercial gain or a corporate entity where you're working for, somebody who's just trying to generate revenue, really. In this case, it was actually for the real worth of the work. And it was actually judged by that because of its practicality and its usefulness to people. And it just made me think that's kind of how it should be in a lot of cases. I'd love to start with a question around that and just around what sense of responsibility and, I guess, accomplishment or feeling of worth do you feel in the work that you do?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think that was a nice way to put it. I really think there's a moment, and you sort of, in how you just addressed or introduced that, then sort of hit the nail on the head, where anyone can apply themselves to anything. But what is the outcome that you're delivering, and what impact is that creating? And I really think there's a conscious decision that, speaking for myself as a designer, that I made in my career, where I decided that I wanted to have social impact and provide community good with my efforts. Done the banks, done all that stuff, insurance, been there, done that. But the outcome of that time and investment that you put in is for somebody else's financial gain. Whereas the efforts that the team put in at WorkSafe is all about ensuring that we have a civic insurance product that looks after people when they're harmed at work, which brings huge value to the community here in Victoria. So definitely made that as a conscious decision. And there's many complications that go with coming home every day, but all of that you've just done to get through the day is for the good of the community is satisfying.
Yeah, we'll come on to maybe some of the day-to-day, but just coming back to that point around the big decision. Was it a big lead up to that? And how did it come about? What situation were you in? Tell us the story.
So I had been doing a lot of consulting and working in agencies and consultancies, moving around where a lot of the service design work is, design research, UX work, comms work, whatever design things were going on. I think there was a moment where I was doing some consulting for Australia Post. There was a co-design lab that was set up in Footscray. It's all attached to Australia Post's strategy around connecting communities. And we designed this amazing service there were lots of designers involved out of this co-design lab, where we were looking at breaking down unconscious bias and building better connected communities and sort of trying to tackle social isolation. And it was just this moment of, yes, we're doing this. There is an end goal that is kind of ROI based, but at the same time, we're doing it for such positive social impact with the community. And, I could never get that buzz back. And I was looking around, and the move to WorkSafe had many other drivers attached to it: geographic change, COVID, lots of other things. There was already sort of a lab set up in WorkSafe when I joined called the Innovation Centre. And the team that I went into straight away. And the appeal of why I wanted to go was doing ethnography with people from diverse backgrounds to look at how we can better get them to understand their rights and responsibilities. So I was immediately thrown into a team in a civic organization that was looking at how do we better involve community. We were following purist co-design kind of practices and ladders of participation, all that kind of stuff. And I was immediately sucked into the very rich end of design in a place that could have impact. So it all just kind of laddered in that way. And, the journey from there, that was almost 3 years ago, has always had this sentiment around, for me at least, and what I drive and try and empower and get people passionate about in the team is the fact that you're doing this for social impact, for civic good in the community. You can go to the banks, but here, we're doing something that is very special and adds great value to everyone around us. So it's a privilege, really, I think, to be in the position that the team is now. WorkSafe.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, that's really heartwarming just to hear not only the context of that realization, but also the move that you made and where you got to with it, but the fact that the work is happening out there and it's work for good. Because I think coming back to the point around responsibility, design has its usual practices, and obviously you can take that in and through basically to realize lots of different outcomes. And the outcomes may be varied. The outcomes may carry other ethical considerations, and you've got to be thinking about, as a designer, where are you pushing people? You're skilled in creating nudges and experiences in the interface or in the interaction that effectively can influence behavior and do influence behavior. So what is your responsibility there? And I think the fact that you can use it for a force of good is incredibly powerful. I'm wondering, just thinking about the process, actually, maybe this is a massive topic around process in itself, but you can think about when in that set of stages you're thinking about the impact that something might have, whether it's at the start or through actually unpacking the problem, or maybe going into more of the ideation, the solutions, where you start to realize, what the longer lasting effect of this work can actually be. What's your take on that? Do you feel like it's something that you set out to do with ambition, with intent? Do you feel like it just gravitates towards something bigger when you stumble upon a really good idea?
Yeah, it's sort of complex. There's a few avenues of enabling and gaining momentum through businesses. At the moment, part of my trajectory and what I'm aiming to do is to really nail down what are our social impact measures for our benefit realization across the enterprise. Mm-hmm. And this is sort of landing here because, without it at that highest level of what are the KPIs that the enterprise is trying to deliver, you can instantly lose momentum in delivering things. At the end of the day, WorkSafe is an insurance product that needs to maintain a sustainable scheme because that's how we provide that support to the community. But things can get lost in those kind of metrics without the appropriate sort of drive and momentum through them. So when we do come back to some other work that we've done that sort of tried to drive that through, we sort of hold on to what is the positive impact through to another metric. You can kind of have to build those connections to build that story to continue to drive that momentum. Some of the other things that I do, though, within our practice is I actually have things like inclusiveness baked into our JDs, our PDs. So it's sort of a metric for any designer's performance to be sure that they're being inclusive and thinking about, the entire Victorian community and the impact that their work will create. So, sort of as far as sort of planetary stuff, but it's sort of baked into each designer's role at WorkSafe because it's kind of that systemic thing. Can't keep pushing to get people to write a principle about these things, but if it's in their job description, well, I got to do it. There's a few things that I do, but I really think it's a lot of these things sort of come down to designers are quite good at talking about, social impact, human-centered design, co-design, ladder participation, all this kind of stuff. Business does not listen to that. Design is our mindset. It's not our vocabulary. If we have this drive and this passion and this mission, and so do so many people in business, it's just how do you get the business to focus on those things as well? And that's where your benefit realization comes in. And, how do we sort of change those key metrics that the whole enterprise or business is moving towards to create those things? Think about root cause or systemic ways to change things. That's kind of where I'm heading with it
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely takes a skilled eye and a practitioner's lens really to be able to apply that and also to be able to convert what can appear to be really high level and maybe empty metrics up front that sit at a corporate level, corporate strategy level, and actually convert that into meaningful and tangible outcomes that are much more specific and that people can really understand and work towards. What have you found works really well in that regard?
Well, some of the things that we really look at are known clinical models, like biopsychosocial models. And we kind of work, at the moment, we've worked with them to sort of look at if you can rebuild capacity in social, you can have better impact across other recovery in physical and mental. Again, it's systemic. And, we're in a crisis of social isolation at the moment, which is impacting any kind of recovery or health recovery in Australia right now. Attaching those things to those other key sort of metrics can help show why there's a need to deliver a new service or product, to boost it, to build up social capacity or any other thing to sort of get people to re-engage. So social capacity is connectedness, it's thriving communities, it's getting rid of social isolation and building back people into life. Because social impact measures are very hard. Actually attaching what is a social impact measure is a tricky thing and is actually quite hard to quantify. People do great work at it, but attaching it to business metrics is a sort of yeah, sure. Is that the business metric? Okay, go do the thing. Let's see the business metric move. But that's the other thing as well. It's through doing it. And that's the battle as well. The challenge is getting momentum up in projects that are sitting a bit left of a traditional way of doing things. But this is where the other shift in organizations this need to sort of occur around being more problem-centric as opposed to project-centric. So if you want to look at what are all the problems across the journeys that we're supporting, how can we stir up evidence or test in those more complicated problems to see if they can have that upwards sort of lift in the metrics and across those journeys. Again, it's like you start talking about social impact measures, the business is going to go glassy-eyed. It's like, but how can you show that doing something differently can have a rise or an impact across those key things that they're tracking and moving on?
Maybe it's official or unofficial, but is there almost an agreement, something that says we're going to go in with the ambition that this is what we're aiming at as an outcome for this program of work or this project? We're going to encounter a number of things, obviously, through the customer journeys, through the societal areas in business or whatever it is that you're uncovering. And all of that will lead to a further understanding, probably not of just the problem that you've identified to begin with, but some broader things. How does that unravel and what do you do with the information when you come across it along the journey?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think really to summarize what you're saying is it's a hypothesis, right? So, like whatever we're trying to achieve, there's many hypotheses that we can test, kind of thing to achieve that. So how do those things kind of unravel at WorkSafe? Well, we have sort of many different sort of streams of how we engage and create design opportunities and work. And one sort of project that helped set us up a portfolio was a project that we titled WorkSafe of the Future. And really what this project was, it was a forecasting and strategic foresight project that helped define 5 key strategic areas that we should be considering looking at having impact in the future. Like in 5 to 10 years, we think that these things are emerging threats or opportunities. So that project itself is sort of loosely tied to sort of speculative futures or design strategy kind of methodologies. Really, it's looking at what are the cold hard facts that can drive us to the next 5 years. And then what's the kind of expert opinion that can look at pushing us past those 5 years? So it's a small strategic choice within a business to kind of look at what's next and where it's heading with like a low investment, low risk. But then, what happens after that is obviously you have your portfolio of strategic areas where you're going to go and test hypotheses that could look at stirring up evidence that could support future decisions. One of the key areas we were looking at was the rapidly changing economy that we're in right now. And the state of employment, the state of education is completely different to what it was 10 years ago, let alone 20 years ago. What we did is we would then turn that into a sort of another area of diverging, looking at what is the new modern economy and what are the challenges that exist in it? What are the behaviors that we can observe about people with our provocation about trying to replace themselves into work? One of our key metrics is getting people off the support payments and back into work and life. So, this kind of raises a whole bunch of complications around, well, what are the behavioral things that are happening? What are the barriers that exist? And how do people feel about re-engaging in an economy in a different way to they're used to? A lot of the people, in manual handling injuries come from long-term careers in their industries. They can't go back because the terrible truth is that they've been, they're injured. They're not going to be able to recover as well, so they can't go back to their job as a mechanic or a builder. But how can we get them past the barrier of this long-term life employment to think about how they could apply themselves in a different way in our now modern economy? What happens is this long tail of, some of the barriers are they just fall off. They become very socially isolated because they're at home, they get payments, they can't do much, they disconnect from their community. That insight and that barrier itself is that they need to rebuild their capacity and connectedness in community to be able to actually even engage in a conversation about rehabilitation, let alone a conversation about occupational rehabilitation into a new job that's completely different to what it is. So from those kind of barriers, then, we go, all right, we'll start to sort of co-design or come up with some solutions of how to do that. One of the programs we had sort of 4 ideas that came out of it. We go through the rigor of doing further testing into, are these desirable? Are these viable? Are these feasible? Really sort of flesh them out to be services or products that can be delivered into the community. And then you kill them. If they don't work, you get rid of them. And the ones that are keeping the most momentum and pushing forward through the business and proving highly desirable, you get them to the stage where you can pilot them. Much to the annoying success of this project we've done, 3 of them are going to pilot now. And they all come from that kind of one insight like that kind of drives through to that. The Raim's power of 10 model comes into play here, which is complicated in itself because these government agencies are already at scale. So scaling things is incredibly complicated in an already at scale business. But we just take that staged approach. Really you're looking at creating a concept idea and a service that is real enough that people think it's highly desirable, it's their perfect service to a certain amount. And then we just scale it out. So boom, 100. And doing that is the quickest way to get momentum from that lower fidelity through to a full-fledged experience prototype. But putting something out as a service that you are actually hands off and it is just living through a vendor doing something to stir up evidence comes with huge other complications around frameworking the evaluation, building that end-to-end capture within it. There are 3 things now that are out in the world being tested that, if our sums went well, could have huge impact on our scheme. If they reach a scale level that can be supported, they're creating enormous amounts of financial stability, but that is through getting people off the scheme and back to work. So therefore, it's building people back into their communities, bringing them back into life and connecting to those social impact ambitions that we have. So that's sort of one way of doing it that we've done at WorkSafe. And, it's a long process. But the whole point is, how do you move from 0 to 10, or the unknown to the known, and deliver? And you need to have that whole end-to-end scope of how design can build that momentum through. And that's really where the sort of strategic design part comes into it. Because if you don't have a heightened enough business acumen to drive it through a business, you're just another designer in a lab throwing ideas on a shelf. Designer mindset, business language, is really what drives that momentum through businesses, in my opinion.
To have got to that level of maturity is impressive in itself, because I know that design is working and functioning at a more micro level with shorter term horizons and outcomes, and probably smaller and less lofty ambitions than what you've described, and probably less meaningful ones too. Yeah, I'm just interested to kind of unpack that maybe a little bit, just to think about how, for emerging designers or people that are thinking about how to sort of shift from, you were talking about a mindset, but in a lot of cases, design as a language isn't understood either. How do you break from a situation where you're pretty much taking the orders to deliver something in UX to influencing the outcomes that you've described?
Yeah, sure. Do it. Just do the work. Another thing I always crap on about is selling design, Look, who we got? We got the Design Council. They came up with the double diamond. They did a pretty good job of it. Everyone had a go at that. We always talk about that. You got IDEO with design thinking. They cut through. They're still a massive organization. And all these are just ways to articulate designers doing stuff. But it's broken down into a business process. So businesses can start to understand what it is and how it works. And there's milestones and measurables and things that are tracking and booked activities. And one of the things that a lot of less mature organizations do is they go, we're using that framework. That's the innovation framework that we're using. That's the design framework that we're using. But then there's no design leadership there with a design mindset to be able to sort of go, oh no, don't do that. Like that's a waste of time. And all of a sudden it's just like, holy shit, we did this design project and it took 6 months. And now somebody's saying we should all have VR goggles and it loses its impact. But if you're in a position where you're actually using your craft, that is powerful. If you're in a UX position right now and you're making the thing that the user interacts with, nobody else is doing that. And it's like you're delivering. You're actually getting things into people's hands. And, it's going to get complicated depending on the size of the business and your project management office and delivery frameworks and, be a change manager over here and a BA over there. And it can all get really complicated, but it's just like, how much more can you chip off to show the value of applying human insight into the work you're doing? Because really, like, you're de-risking the cost of delivery in that position right there, because you're making sure that, sure, maybe you haven't had that upstream go at it to make sure that the problem is right, but you're making sure that it's desirable. So it's like you're making sure that the business objective is going to have the highest impact possible. And that has huge value. For me, I talk a lot about ensuring relevance, because if you do start to move into these more mature design models, these high, like problem-centric thinking for an organization and helping define what the problems are, you can get lost up there. You can just diverge and diverge and diverge, and you will never converge because it's exciting. You're going deep, you're going wide, you're doing field work, observation work. Like, it's amazing work to be done. But is it relevant? Is it actually delivering something? And you've always got to hold on to that part of it, that an insights pack is interesting, but does it have impact on the end user? And being able to make sure that as you mature from that craft of delivering design, and you make sure that you hold on to it, because that is the relevance of how you deliver through. And that is where we've all come from. Like, designers have been around for a really long time, but they've been designing comms, they've been designing experiences and interactions, they've been designing furniture, buildings, interior fit outs, and that's all relevant. And there is nothing more relevant than someone who designs a house. Like, we all live in houses, but the home builder doesn't run away and do a big ethnographic study for 3 years and then forgets about building houses. You've got to come back to what you're doing and how you're delivering it and how you're having impact with the end user at the end of the day. So if you are in that position, you are in a privileged position. You're in a spot where you're actually delivering work to an end user to have impact. There's another concept I'll give you that, again, I annoy my team with, about a designer's realm of consciousness. Yeah. So it's kind of like you start in this like place of you are customer centric and you're designing desirable things. But there are sort of 4 realms or trajectories that you can build your realm of consciousness and therefore build your understanding of why we're addressing problems. On an upward sort of trajectory, you've really got the business that you're in, or the industry that you're in, or the economy that you're working with. And, that goes all the way up to, why does it even exist? Why is there even a government agency to support people who are injured at work? It's like, well, because there was a crisis there. Like, that's why it exists. And then, there's many layers that come down to that. But as well, there's the layers of delivery. So really, if you're working in tech and digital, you're going all the way through to, why is Salesforce even built the way it's built? And you need to be able to understand that downward thing as well as that upward thing at realms, like you flux it out. But then the horizontal is kind of like, what is the past and why are we here? But it's like, really it's your context of what's happened in the past to lead you to why you're making this sort of design decision. And then the one going out the other side is the future. Like, digital's fast and quick and easy, and you can update it and do releases every 2 weeks. But if you're going to create something, you really want it to have long-lasting impact. And especially when you're making something that's at a large scale, because it will still take years for them to get around to do the transformation, get it in an iterative process, and actually make those changes. So you want to have some kind of forecasting or foresight to sort of know why you're doing that. And that's what annoyingly being called the designer's realm of consciousness. And it's like, as you mature or become more strategic, kind of start to think about that as a greater whole and what you're designing, the sort of quadrants that you're moving through as you're designing as well.
I like that.
Anyway.
It's like a sort of 4D version of what I thought the world of work was, but now you've drawn my attention to it, I won't be able to unsee it. You're right. Your realm of vision, your realm of influence is up to you to determine how wide you want to set your aperture when you're working in an organization. Yeah. Because you can be totally committed to your craft and you can be totally committed to that in the present because you're head down, you're working on a 2-week sprint. You're just looking at what needs to be done and then you'll worry about the next thing. And that produces some amazing results. But obviously context and, a curiosity around context can lead you to broader conversations. And I think tying back to your previous point, if you're a rising star, then it's how do you take the steps to almost enlighten yourself through the work that you're doing, but see the longer impact. Look further forward than the first delivery or the first release. Look back if you think that's interesting. It's a great depiction of how I think the realm of influence can really be unpacked a little bit more for designers out there.
Yes. Well, realms of influence.
Should we talk about influence? I mean, how do you become influential? Because you can talk a different language to a lot of people in the world that we work. And, you can't always get to a level understanding with a lot of people. I don't know if it's language, semiotics, a lot of things, but it depends largely on the people that are either your champions, they're evangelizing, or it can rely a lot on the proof, the fact that there's social proof in what you're doing, but also the outcomes that you've delivered as well. So how do you progress the maturity of design in an organization?
I mean, this is a tricky one, and it's really what's your objective with it. And so I'll go back to say, you just do it. And if it's good, people want more of it. It's how referrals work. And that's just an easy way to build out your capacity. People want more because it's good, keep delivering. That's at a delivery level. I think really what's quite interesting as well is storytelling is uncontrollably influential. People who can tell compelling narratives, people who can make sure a message cuts through, and especially in a political environment, will always have impact. And there's a tension there because modern organizations that are running more agile and have stronger PMOs really are shifting away from powerful and impactful stories. So your purpose goes from more of a mission, vision, goal to more of a WSDIF kind of thing. And that is challenging. But I tell you what, storytelling trumps it all. At the end of the day, someone who can influence their peers, influence the powers above or the people above to make decisions, always sort of get ahead or always sort of get that larger realm of responsibility or accountability.
Yeah.
So do not shy away from storytelling, because a lot of the time, just even the selling the craft of storytelling is hugely valuable for businesses. So if you can clarify things for people and tell a narrative around it and help them get what they want across the line, there's plenty of work after that. It is all tied back to doing, using design again and again in everything that you do is how you deliver that value that just gives you a wider net of influence.
And that's through each stage, isn't it? I mean, obviously there's a degree of pitching up front where you're needing to communicate or set a vision for what you're going to do and getting people on board with that. Then you're keeping people involved through the process. And obviously at the end, when you've got a nice shiny new thing to show, it's telling the story of how you got there and where it might then lead and what the possibilities are that have opened up as a result. How do you think people can best equip themselves with the right skill set there from a storytelling point of view? Because it's not natural to everybody. I think we can safely say that.
Oh, well, you could be like me and go spend 5 years in advertising, which I don't recommend. But I think one simple construct that I always use, so this is a hot tip going out to whoever's listening,
go on.
is, and there's heaps of ways to do this. Inside idea execution, that's a great one. But, how might we sow that? It's all there. But what I love is, what's the situation? What is actually going on? And that's like a peeled back kind of, this is the current state. This is what we're looking at. And then what's the complication with that? What are the pain points, that exist within that? So then what's the answer? Or what's the question? And that's your future state.
Yeah.
And if you can start to build a narrative that can quantify your metrics through it, that can sort of talk to ROI through it, that can look at potential impacts as well, how you qualify those things, who have you talked to and built it out. It's very analytical and it's very precise and it's clear and just seems to work most of the time to cut through with business mindsets. So that's one of the storytelling sort of frameworks that I use a fair bit.
It's made me think about what I should ask as my next question, but maybe we'll go back to some of the, I guess, the harder lessons that you needed to learn in your previous lives, in your previous career positions, whatever you want to talk about really. But what are some of the things that stand out as being, I guess, those big moments?
I think one of the hardest lessons that always sticks with me, that I always hang on to, is in a project that I was consulting in that I let my design leaderships. I was working with a client. We were working towards doing a thing, and it was really hard because I was just working with myself and a peer and heaps of the clients, and it was really hard to reach consensus. And I was trying to drive a pretty straightforward, basic HCD project or workshop. I just dropped my guard because of this constant trying to meet these deadlines of getting to this basic kind of thing. And I just let them have it. And I'm like, well, if you don't get it, that's fine. What do you reckon? How do we do it? How is it going to sound? What are we going to do? And I just let the design leadership go. And then we went to present the thing and it was not well received. It was bad. We quickly had this sort of meeting where we ducked away, and in a very short period of time, we were meant to fix everything apparently. And in that short period of time, I just went back and went, all right, let's just use a basic design construct here. I know that you're struggling with it. I know it's hard to comprehend, but I don't know how many more times I can explain it. I'm just going to cut it out. We'll present it back and we'll see how we go. And the mood changed, 15 minutes later. And I just came out of that meeting, almost had a panic attack. And then just thought, why did I do that? Why did I not just hold on to the design, what I knew was right as a designer, and let it get morphed into this thing trying to reach consensus and look at the result? So I think there's such a hard lesson. That was a hard lesson to learn, but it's something that I always talk about with my team because they always feel it. They always feel like it's starting to go too wide again. It's starting to sort of feel funny and like we're never going to be able to come in. And it's always the story that I bring out and they're like, I've heard that one, Andrew. Don't tell me that. It's such an important lesson to make sure that you're an expert in diverging and converging. You've got a tool set and methodology that can help drive you.
Yeah.
And that's why you're there. You're there to facilitate a process of design with whatever problem, wicked or not, that you're being thrown at. You need to hold on to that leadership of, no, this is how you do it. It can be hard. It can be complicated. And look, I fucked it up once. So it's a hard lesson learned.
Yeah, it's playing the role of the guide, isn't it? I guess not just the team member or the innocent bystander. You're actually having to take people on the journey, and obviously the storytelling aspect that you were mentioning before really helps with that. It reminds me of a similar situation. I was fairly early in my HCD kind of practices as well. And I was so excited by the research that I basically wanted to just play back everything to the client. And I'd been told that this client had a really short attention span. And I just went hell for leather. And I was determined to get through in 117 slides in about 60 minutes or something and just pump out what it was saying. But it was kind of like the so what factor wasn't there. And even though I was really pleased with the presentation, the amount of work that had gone into it, it wasn't taking him anywhere. And so that was definitely a lesson learned, but similar thing really. And I think the possibility that you encounter as a designer, it kind of sits with you, right? You have to decide where the direction needs to be, where the center of gravity needs to be, and also just leave certain things behind because they're either overindulgent or they're taking off at a tangent, or like you're saying, you can just go deeper and sideways and upwards and downwards, but you might be drifting from what it is you're trying to solve. So what are some of the kind of tips that you would give anchoring people in those moments of despair where it's like you're usually quite stressed, you're overwhelmed, you've got a deadline, you're presenting in an hour, somebody else is ringing you at the same time, whatever it is. But how do you really focus in on what needs to be done? What are your personal approaches to that?
Yeah, sure. What is the outcome you are meant to be delivering? If you just gave them a version of the outcome. That is the minimal requirement. If you can build out the evidence, do the analysis, and run that golden thread all the way back to a root cause, that is magic. But if they just wanted a fucking welcome screen, like just give them the welcome screen. If you lose sight of that, you got to focus on the outcome. What's the outcome that you're trying to achieve? And some like interesting stories about this, because sometimes it's really hard. And sometimes one project I was doing was quite a complex project about how to create consistent behaviors across a large workforce to therefore brand behaviorals.
Sounds really simple.
Behavioral design across an enormous workforce. And so one of the things I did in my research was I mapped the business. And this is like, just an ecosystem of influence. So, what are the tools, systems, or programs that are influencing across the business that then refer down into the customer? And, this was just me going, oh, yeah, that's kind of, I went away and did all the research and took all the notes and came back and drew this lovely thing. And I'm like, all right, so that's cool. That's interesting. Let's put that away, because what do we need to be delivering? We need to be delivering programs that do this. And the client was like, oh, hang on 1 minute. Bring that thing back out. Like, this is amazing. Look at this map. And all of a sudden, I just had this thing in my head where I was like, you would just be happy with that. That's all that you want. And then again, I had to just be like, no, we've got to move forward. We've got to drive past this and actually deliver some new services or programs into the business that are going to have the impact that you want. And so I made this funny joke with the lady where I was like, she's like, can I have the map? Can you give me the map? And I'm like, we'll only give you the map if you print it out on a 20-meter circular rug and put it in the foyer of the building. Like, that's the only way we're going to do this. And it just got to pass the map. And that's just like, what is the outcome?
Yeah.
Because there's been some other interesting projects that I've observed in the market that I haven't had anything to do with, where they've been really focused on mapping and creating these artifacts. They're to design something, not to capture these things. And the results of the projects are, wow, this is really complicated. We should uncomplicate it. But that's not really an outcome. It has done something. It's shone light on the fact that something might be overcomplicated. But what are you designing? What are you delivering? How is that having impact on the end user from your project? So it's hanging on to what is your outcome and what are you aiming to design and deliver? And it's even happening now with the work that I'm doing. And, there's this mass focus on capture and analysis, but really, where are we going with this? Where's the deck? Where's the endpoint? Where are we heading? My team get it. They're like, oh yeah, shit, pull us out of there. Let's go. But it is always something that you can get, like with your 117-page deck, which, we used to say it's not a deck unless it shakes the table when you throw it.
Yeah, is that one? Everyone gets a copy as well.
Guilty. We'd often have drinks when the deck went over 100 pages. But, it's like you need the exec summary, and even you need to have delivered something and say, here's the next thing that's going out to be piloted or whatnot, especially when you're in an organization. The beauty of consulting is all the hard work's done. Consulting's just coming in to do the bit, and then they're out, which is also satisfying. But in an organization, the whole design framework is built well beyond that moment of just needing vendors coming to do something. It's what happens next. And it's a moment to create rapid momentum in hyper specialist expertise to then continue delivering on either side.
It's a great point around consulting being so narrowly focused. And that has its own implications, obviously. From an organizational point of view, if you're within that organization and you're the driver and you're the leader or team member, it doesn't really matter. The scope for being able to just take a wrong turn, get lost, get sidetracked, could lose you weeks. And you might not even know it until somebody else pulled you up on it. So how do you navigate some of that?
The only thing that I sort of manage is narratives. When I'm talking to teams, I just want to hear the narrative. I just want to hear, like, how are you going back to the business with this? Once you're doing that, you're kind of almost simplifying or getting people to understand that as a whole, you're trying to add value to this thing. This is also a little bit different in regards to, if you're working on more of a strategic sort of experience design project or a strategic design project, you are kind of outside of story points and agile and all that kind of stuff, but you can still get lost in that depth. But if you kind of go, but why are you doing it to add to this overarching sort of narrative? Then it's almost like people just sort of see the need to wrap up and move on, because that's the project, is the deck that's going to inform the decision. So I think always try and bring the team back to the higher narrative. What is the story that they're going to tell that's going to influence the decision that needs to be made? And when you're looking at that higher narrative, how concise and simple does it need to be to deliver the impact that you need to make a decision? So that really helps people understand that constant depth and diving of analysis to continue to clarify insights because you're worried you haven't covered all the gaps. It needs to end because you need to start doing more stuff and you need to start moving on. That for me is a simple way to just help people understand that they need to move projects. But obviously, if you're in a project, leading a project, there's just good ways to be. Good proactive researchers who just say, no, all right, 7 people, similar cohort, we're revisiting insights, we're moving on. Just the constant concept of rolling synthesis is so good. You can get teams with a documentation mindset where at the end of every week or every show, every sprint or whatever, however they decided to work, they're wrapping up. That's also just a great way to sort of continue to build that momentum to be hitting those outcomes that you're trying to achieve. Because at the end of every cycle that you're working in, you're going back to what's the thing that we're trying to do. And then what's a wrap up of the learnings that we've had? And is it aligning to that? You're just forced into this constant sort of repetitious pattern of doing that.
Oh, yeah, I mean, that's all good practice around documentation and the showcasing, keeping everyone in the loop.
Yeah.
I'm wondering about the kind of curveballs, the things that come in from the side that you're not expecting. And that can be through the research or it can be from an internal voice as well, where somebody just pipes up one day and says, I've seen this in the paper, or my neighbor was talking to me about this, or have we thought about this? And it just kind of completely just comes from the side. You don't know what to do with that until you've had to think about it a little bit more. But how do you respond to some of those side agendas?
They're really interesting. It's a great input. Like at that level, it's sort of like, that's awesome. Let's go check that out. Let's figure out how it impacts the decisions that we're making. Because you've got to remember, it's human-centered design, right? So the business or the client is also part of it. So if they have an input, it's something you have to consider. Maybe I'm lucky enough that I've never articulated an insight somebody's wholeheartedly disagreed with. But even if they did, then that would just make me think a bit harder. The world is not without curveballs, though. We had Miro turned off in an hour for some reason for 3 weeks. Right. Security risk, it's off. But the other thing I think I learn about designers every day is that they are just so passionate and adaptable. I think within 3 hours, we trialed every other online cloud-based platform that we could possibly get around our firewall and had landed on a few solutions to keep moving. So it's kind of like you have to listen and you have to take everything on board. But if you build strong enough narratives, it should always sort of work because you're constantly thinking about these loops and feedback loops that you're getting in different conversations and narratives. So again, the power of storytelling.
From what you're describing, it feels like a really controlled environment in which you work and a really pleasant one, actually. And that's great to hear. It's really refreshing. I'm wondering, within that context, how you tend to handle constraints, whether you see them, some people see them as a limiter or an enabler. In some cases, are they helpful? Are they not helpful? But your thinking there is going to be quite expansive. So how do you control what the boundaries are there?
I really think you don't want to come across a constraint. You want to identify it before you commence a project. I call them parameters. What are the parameters that you're working in? That's politics, people, processes, and tech. What are those constraints that you're working within? That is just part of your design problem. It's what's in scope, what's out of scope. You don't want to come across it. You want to make sure it's upfront so that everything you're doing is working within those constraints. And I think maybe potentially more complicated than that is sort of potentially what are constraints that we're working in an official organization, doing generative research with users, with people. So, some of our constraints are ethical considerations. Everyone on my team is qualified in trauma-informed facilitation, but we knew that up front. So we designed the mechanisms to ensure that we did follow proper ethical protocols and made sure that everyone was up to spec in trauma implementation. Now, that is a more complicated one, but it's also refreshing. There's a lot of consultancies out there who are talking about trauma-informed facilitation and how it's a speciality and an expert need. But for us, it's just a necessity for work. You're not going to do an interview unless you've done that. And we're not procuring from an agency who doesn't have the right screening processes and things like that. Our consent process is full on, but we're still doing it. And there was a lot of pioneers at WorkSafe who really pushed through to get that to happen. I think a lot of people take it for granted in the team now that we can practice it, but it was a massive constraint. The concept of bringing an injured worker who was frustrated with their experience into the building to have a conversation is complicated. So there was a lot of work done to get through those constraints so that we can practice.
That's a really great example of just getting it done. And I'm wondering, it's not always that you feel like it's the art of the possible. Somebody lays down the gauntlet and hopefully it's at the start of the project, or far enough advanced, it means you can plan for it. You can set some things in motion, but this concept of maneuverability isn't always there. And it's hard to achieve sometimes when you catch it at the wrong time, and then the organization needs to respond, not ready for it. People need to just jump into a room, figure it out. And then you get something going. What are some of the big drivers of organizations, particularly in your case, being successful in driving change quickly when they need to, do you think?
Yeah, well, at the scale that we're in, it's incredibly complicated because another thing I've been talking about team about, which they hate, is there's so many layers of reform that are in an organization, from the political directive and legislative demand through to, ministers, and then all the way through an executive policy layers, frameworks that already exist, and then coming down onto tech platforms, tech, integration and platforms themselves like this. And it just goes on. You can keep going and going around. How much reform do you need to do to make reform? We currently have some legislative reform that we're doing at WorkSafe, and the team are doing an amazing job of getting around these big problems and pulling focus onto them and going towards what they're being asked to deliver. So that's great. We also do like a lot of tech transformation and reform, which is pretty standard across a lot of businesses, really. These things do require bigger effort and a lot more focus, but they do come into their own sort of big teams and big environments that sort of focus in and do these efforts. But then we also have like reforming that we're doing around more bigger community needs. And this is where we're helping like create new strategies for people to be able to sort of start on their process of reform. Reform is not easy. Transformation of a business that's already at scale is complicated. Even evolutionary change or iterative change is hard in an organization that is so, like, everyone is so passionate about what they're doing and they're doing amazing work. But getting through the business planning to create change within streams of work is hard for everyone. Truly creating reform, if I remove it from WorkSafe and just talk about reform in general, depending on the scale that you're doing it, is the velocity that you'll get. If you look at a transformation office and the core construct of it, really, you've got business value. So somebody who's holding on to what the business value is, they're kind of like project manager. Then you've got like design or innovation. Then you've got business adoption, which is once you do all that stuff, how is it actually going to deliver? As well as business analysts, just sort of working on maybe they're tech focused or business focused or whatever it is. And those kind of four streams are normal sort of constructs in transformation offices. But if you think about that construct of, do we understand the value that's trying to be happening? How can we enable that to be delivered through design? And then how good is the design going to be? So what is the impact of change and what are the business processes that are going to kind of go into it? The smaller the business you are, the easier it is, because the big thing is adoption. It's simple because you're just talking to a few people about change. Your cohort is smaller, so it's easier to design desirable experiences, and your processes will be less because it's less complicated. But no matter how large you scale, that transformational work just sort of slows with the bigger the business gets. And, this is where we have these huge isolated transformation offices that we know they have an X at the end of them, or, there's other ones anywhere. They have an enormous backlog of work that they're working towards. And the complication that often comes into them is a lot of big design up front, like we were talking about, getting into that space of really diverging too far. And then all of a sudden there's that business adoption or tech implementation. It's like, come on, let's go. And the work has to come in and just get delivered to a train or what's not. So transformation and reform is really hard. And then there's I'm talking about at that level. But for a designer on a team, in a multidisciplinary team with a backlog of work and a product owner, it's even more complicated. Roles and responsibilities. How do you show the value of design? How do you build momentum? Where's your backlog coming from? Why are you prioritizing the way it is? It all just gets really a lot for a lot of people. I think the best thing is what I've been calling sort of strategic experience design, where you actually have some designers helping plan how to do it. And, you've got a dedicated time where you're focusing in on segmentation, current state, future state, roadmaps. And you're really having design help in that planning stage to deliver digital transformation experiences. is kind of where I'm seeing value in adding a lot of momentum in those projects. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, momentum is a key word there, because without the realization that you're moving things along, it can feel like you're just in the trenches. You're on the wheel, on the wheel, and you're just not moving ahead. So I think that a lot of individuals, not so much necessarily with teams, because the work will always continue, but individuals, they just run out of steam. Suddenly they're all for it at the beginning, and then it just kind of runs its course. Another opportunity comes up, and then you've lost another team member. So how do you get around some of that? Because obviously, from my point of view, I think the context that you described, the strategic design, the broader ambition, and the way that you can anchor everything to that is really motivating. But other people, I guess they're so busy in the delivery and in their craft, that might be a consideration, it might not. But how do you keep people motivated?
There's sort of a key construct that I often run around with about sort of, how do you develop 3 core areas across people? And it's like, what's their mastery? How do you give them authority? And then how do you drive their purpose? I think in the modern design industry that we work in now, I don't think it's fair to say that your purpose should be your backlog. That's where I kind of start drawing the line. As a manager, I'm more like, well, it's my role to inspire people, kind of thing. And to be reiterating that point of why we're here at WorkSafe. What are we doing? Look at design, and everyone's doing it, and look at all the ways it's being applied around here to have positive impact and change. And then that talks to how do we support our team to be ambitious, but also measure that ambition with the reality of what work we're going to be doing. And so I do a lot of work with the team around understanding their capabilities, understanding where they want to grow, looking at that mastery thing. And something that I'm bringing back now with a vengeance is much more focused training, but training that's going to mean that they're going to do it and then do it at work. I think there's a complication where you can get people interested by just giving them free training to all this stuff.
Yeah.
But why are you going to send someone on a speculative futures course and then put them back into a UX role? That's why they're going to leave, because they're going to be like, oh, I'm going to go do my design futures master's degree at RMIT now. I'm going to go back to working at the old bar. It's keeping people engaged but measured around being inspired by design, being inspired by the social impact that you're creating, supporting and nurturing people to have that autonomy to do work the way they want to do it, which is why I'm only interested in the narrative. Tell me how you're going to do it. But, as long as it's delivering the business objectives, then that's fine. So I give people a lot of space, a lot of freedom, but that is hard as well, because there is a lot of moments where, and I see this in pure Scrum, in other organizations where people just kind of hide in it. So if there's less monitoring, people are more self-organized. You're just trying to help support across a few key areas and create a general uplift that has meaning to the business. So that's kind of what we're aiming for. Some people will just hide in it, and that's the negative effect of it. But then there are some people in it who thrive. They take every opportunity that they can get. They start applying themselves in ways that you've never seen before. And all of a sudden, you're having a skip catch up with someone and they're going to be your boss one day, kind of thing. And you can just see them just going at it and driving it, being passionate. And I think it's that autonomy that gives people that. And there's always certain levels that are just sort of tough decisions, just like straight up leadership things that you can't get people autonomy over, because it's just a management sort of thing. But it's like, when it comes to practicing design and doing design, one thing that I did in the past, which was really good, is I just let people self-nominate what jobs they wanted to work on. So, we had a portfolio of work and there needed to be people across it. And I just went around and asked everyone what they wanted to work on. And we talked through the portfolio. And I think I only had to make one funny call where I was like, oh, sorry, kind of thing.
Next
but
time.
That's all right.
Yeah.
And otherwise, a team of 12 people were working on the projects they wanted to be working on. And then they all did amazing stuff. It was super fun. But it is a hard balance. Geographically, because we're in Geelong, which is a regional city in Victoria, we don't have the density of designers available in market that the city, Melbourne up the road, has. So we're much more about nurturing designers with where we're at. It's about people at the end of the day. And if you can provide a really supportive, great workplace for people, you can let them grow and train them in their mastery and their craft, and you can give them cool projects to work on. It's pretty sweet. And as long as you don't use that opportunity to skive off in a government job, you're going to have success. Your success is only limited by your own ambition. And if you want to come and chat to me about how to write a good insight, I'm here. It's very much, there's reinventing organizations, teal frameworks. There's lots of interesting models out there that you can look at. But I really think autonomy, mastery, and purpose beyond a backlog is really how I help to try and build and motivate the team to keep doing work, which I think works. I don't know. There's a lot of people who've been around for a while, so that's been good.
That's really good. I mean, it's just such a welcoming environment that you're creating by the sound of it. And from the outside in, not a lot of people would feel comfortable even in considering a role within government compared to what they're used to. It doesn't sit right with some people. But I think from what you're describing, when you get into it, there's such an opportunity there for not only for interesting work, but for high performance, for career development, like all the things that you've mentioned as well. So it's really good to hear and encouraging to many out there who should probably try out other types of work as well, I'd say.
Yeah, and I'd really encourage people to think about the role of a designer in-house. You're becoming more specialized in something. And there's a lot of value in that, because you get quicker momentum into things. Like if you are working in consultancy, one of me and my colleagues used to talk about the week 0, where they send you the 100 decks that you have to read. Yeah. And it's like turning a hairdryer on and you're just staring into the hairdryer for as long as possible. And then you turn it off and then all of a sudden you're in the organization. You know, that rapidly acquiring information sort of stuff is much more organic. And it also makes you the parameters and the things that you were talking about before. You get them from the get-go. You know that these things are this way for this reason. You know, the current state is the way that you are. And WorkSafe is actually a really interesting place to be from a specialization standpoint, because it's sort of in health, it's in insurance, it's in regulatory agencies, and it's in government, but it runs like a private business. So if you're considering a sea change, it is a great place to work. You know, the Surf Coast it's literally 15 minutes that way. Right? I was there during the week after work.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a great place.
I can vouch for that. I was there last week.
That's right. We're definitely always interested in talking to people about career opportunities at WorkSafe. And Chris, I'm sure you'll share my details on LinkedIn, but please reach out if something like this is interested to you. There's always plenty of opportunities at WorkSafe for designers.
Yeah, thank you. Really great to talk to you. Thank you so much, Andrew. Yeah, I mean, there's so much ground that we covered there, both around organizational structure, but around personal hints and tips and tricks and things that can help both understand the context in which we often have to operate and navigate, but also beyond that, what propels you forward as a person within some of those situations as well. So really appreciate your time. And yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Nice. Thanks for listening to me, Chris.
Okay, so that's it for this episode. If you're hearing this message, you've listened all the way to the end. So thank you very much. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'd love to hear your feedback, so please leave us a review and share this episode with your friends, team members, leaders, if you think it'll make a difference. After all, we're trying to help you, the intrapreneurs, kick more goals within your organizations. If you have any questions about the things we covered in the show, please email me directly at chris@companyroad.co. I answer all messages, so please don't hesitate to reach out. And to hear about the latest episodes and updates, please head to companyroad.co to subscribe. Tune in next Wednesday for another new episode.